We are starving, not in our stomachs, but in our minds. Right now, as you listen to this, you are consuming. We swallow terabytes of manufactured outrage before breakfast. We gorge on gigabytes of digital fear during our daily commutes. We stuff ourselves with thousands of calories of empty, scrolling comfort every single night, desperately trying to numb an anxiety we cannot even name. We are the ultimate consumers, overfed on information, overstimulated by screens, and utterly hollow in spirit. We are terrified of the silence. But what happens when you stop consuming? What happens when you strip away the noise, the endless notifications, and the comfortable outrage, leaving nothing but the rhythmic striking of bare flesh against hardened asphalt? In the autumn of 2025, a line drawn in the dust answered that question. 19 figures, draped in traditional saffron robes, stepped onto the unforgiving shoulders of American highways. They didn't speak. They didn't protest. They didn't carry bold signs demanding your attention or your money. They moved as a single, breathing organism. 19 men, operating as one collective entity, undertaking a staggering 2,300-mile journey from the sweltering heat of Texas to the cold heart of Washington, D.C. This was the walk for peace. To the speeding semi-trucks blowing past them, they were a fleeting, colorful curiosity. To the algorithms that rule our digital lives, they were invisible. But beneath their quiet footsteps, they were carrying an invisible weight, a collective burden of human suffering that they had silently agreed to bear. It was a secret, silent load, a burden that would remain entirely unseen, a mystery of the human spirit, until the inevitable violence of winter arrived to test the very limits of their mortality. If you are a skeptic, a cynic, a realist, born of the modern, hyper-connected age, you might look at these 19 silent figures and see absurdity. Why walk when you can drive in climate-controlled comfort? Why choose to starve when the neon signs of a drive-thru are always glowing? Why stay absolutely silent when the whole world is screaming at the top of its lungs just to be heard? Because the screaming has not saved us. We have built an unprecedented empire of constant, instant communication, yet we have never been more fractured, more isolated, or more divided. You should listen to this story because it defies the very underlying logic of our consumer-driven existence. It proves that true clarity does not come from acquiring more data, more opinions, more temporary comfort. It comes from radical, uncompromising subtraction. This is not a tale of passive, gentle meditation. It is a grueling, visceral, physical demonstration of human endurance. It is about witnessing a profound and difficult type of healing, a healing that requires opening the collective wound to the open air, rejecting the synthetic bandages of digital distraction, and walking directly, step by step, through the pain of a divided nation. The journey began not in peaceful tranquility, but in a trial by fire. October 2025, in the deep south of Texas, was a crucible of suffocating, relentless heat. The asphalt highway was a living, breathing enemy, radiating waves of temperature that threatened to melt the thick rubber soles of modern athletic shoes. Yet the collective walked entirely barefoot, 19 pairs of feet, soon to be calloused and bleeding, striking the burning ground in perfect, unified rhythm. When one monk stumbled over a sharp stone, the collective paused. When the rough pavement tore at their skin, the pain rippled through the entire line, felt deeply by all, yet spoken by absolutely none. They were practicing the diet of the horizon. Their asceticism was absolute and unyielding. In a society where we demand sugary snacks between our scheduled meals, this single organism sustained itself on a fraction of the bare minimum. 1 single meal a day. That was the absolute rule, consumed entirely before the sun reached its zenith in the sky. After noon, nothing crossed their parched lips but plain water. No mobile phones to check the news. No podcasts to drown out the grueling physical exhaustion. No music to artificially elevate their heart rates. Just the stark, unbending reality of the next mile, and the mile after that. They were actively starving their egos to feed something much deeper. Their empty alms bowls were a stark mirror held up to the speeding, overstuffed world, reflecting a perfect, terrifying emptiness that most of us spend our entire lives running away from. On November 19th, the violent noise of the world physically collided with their profound silence. Just outside Dayton, Texas, the roaring machinery of modern commerce shattered the meditative rhythm of their walking. A sudden, jarring truck crash tore through the humid air, untwisting heavy metal and scattering dangerous debris directly across their path. In our hyper-connected reality, a highway accident is an immediate invitation to chaos. We instinctively pull out our glowing screens to record the wreckage, hungry for content. We scream for insurance details. We quickly assign blame, letting hot anger flood our veins like a highly addictive drug. We consume the drama because it makes us feel alive. But when the grinding metal finally settled and the toxic dust cleared on that Texas road, the reaction of the 19 was entirely alien to the modern consumer mind. They didn't fracture into panicked, self-serving individuals. The collective organism simply absorbed the massive kinetic shock. When one monk was violently thrown off balance, his bare knees scraping against the harsh, unforgiving gravel, all 19 men felt the stinging tear of the earth. The collective was genuinely wounded. They were physically bruised by the careless, speeding momentum of the society they were walking through. Yet their spiritual armor remained utterly uncracked. There was no shouting. There were no raised fists or desperate calls for legal retribution. There was only an ocean of immediate, chilling compassion directed toward the shaken, terrified driver. They offered no judgment, no moral lectures, only their continued, unwavering presence. To the monks, the accident was not an injustice. It was merely another heavy stone in their path, acknowledged, accepted, and immediately released. They simply adjusted their torn robes, reformed their single-file line, and continued to step forward. Faced with a banquet of justified anger, they refused to take a single bite. But a physical wound from a speeding vehicle was not the greatest test of their resolve. What happened next would challenge their quiet isolation in a way no machine ever could. As they walked relentlessly onward, crossing out of the oppressive Texas heat and stepping into the deeply rooted, traditional heart of the American Bible Belt, the cultural divide widened dramatically. To the local residents, these silent men draped in bright, alien saffron robes were an incomprehensible enigma. They were a quiet anomaly, walking directly through rural towns, where faith is usually loud, proudly spoken, and vigorously defended from wooden pulpits. The distance between the weary, starving monks and the skeptical, porch-sitting onlookers felt impossibly vast. Suspicion hung heavy in the air, as thick as the southern humidity. Then came the stray, a ragged, wandering creature with ribs pressing sharply against her dirty coat, emerged from the periphery of the highway. Her deep hunger perfectly mirrored the ascetic leanness of the monks themselves. She did not bark for attention. She simply fell into step beside the trailing edge of their line, her padded paws matching the rhythm of their calloused bare feet. The collective did not leash her. They did not command her to stay or go. They did not try to own her. They simply allowed her to share their space, their unbroken silence, and their endless, punishing road. This fragile, panting animal soon became known to the world as Aloka, the peace dog. Where human language failed, where cultural and religious barriers stood as high as brick walls, Dahaloka, the peace dog succeeded effortlessly. She became the vital, beating heart that bridged two entirely different, deeply suspicious worlds. A wary, hardened farmer who might never dare to approach a silent, foreign monk would readily walk to the edge of his dusty driveway to offer a tin bowl of cool water to a tired, loyal dog. And in that brief, unguarded exchange, a calloused local hand petting the stray, suddenly meeting the calm, deeply appreciative eyes of the silent collective, the thick ice of misunderstanding instantly melted. The defensive walls of the ego dropped. The 19 men and their canine companion moved as one continuous entity, proving that sometimes the deepest human connections are forged not through endless talking, not through consuming each other's opinions, but through the shared, a quiet care of a vulnerable life. By January of 2026, the punishing humidity of the southern states had hardened into a brutal, unforgiving freeze. As the 19 silently walked into the Carolinas, the sky turned a bruised metallic gray, and the great abyss of winter opened its jaws. The historic snowstorm did not arrive quietly. It howled, instantly burying the landscape under feet of blinding, pristine white. Against this desolate, monochromatic canvas, the thin, vibrant saffron robes of the monks painted a stark, shocking visual. It was a minimalist portrait of endurance, a single, brilliant line of color slicing through an endless, freezing void. In our modern lives, a winter storm is an immediate cue to retreat. We lock our heavy doors, crank up the artificial thermostat, and wrap ourselves in thick, synthetic layers. We instinctively consume endless streams of digital entertainment, binge-watching content, while the physical world outside freezes solid. We equate warmth with safety and consumption with survival. But the collective did not retreat. They possessed no heavy winter coats. They wore no insulated waterproof boots. Their calloused, bare feet, which had miraculously survived the boiling asphalt of Texas, now stepped rhythmically into biting, jagged ice. When one man shivered violently from the sub-zero wind chill, the biting cold echoed through the marrow of the entire line. Yet, they refused to accelerate their pace. They refused to break formation and run toward shelter. They continued to deliberately starve the ego. Witnessing this agonizing, impossible display, well-meaning locals rushed out from their heated homes. Driven by a frantic mixture of awe and deep discomfort, they brought steaming thermoses of coffee, heavy woolen blankets, and lavish, overflowing feasts of hot food. They desperately wanted to force their modern comfort upon the monks, but the collective responded with gentle, unyielding boundaries. Smiling with serene, cracked lips, they politely turned away the heavy feasts, accepting only a meager spoonful of plain white rice or a single sip of lukewarm water. Their empty alms bowls, held steady in the swirling, violent snow, laid bare the terrifying truth of our society. The onlookers suddenly realized that their frantic desire to give, to stuff these silent men with excessive calories and comfort, was actually a desperate attempt to soothe their own internal anxiety. The monks' perfect and unbroken emptiness powerfully exposed the hollow, overstuffed nature of our consumer lives. And it was here, in the darkest, most punishing depths of the blizzard, that the hidden truth of their journey finally revealed itself. Remember the invisible weight they carried? The secret silent load mentioned at the very beginning of this 2,000-mile trek? It was not a magical incantation. It was not a hidden political agenda or a stubborn pride. The secret burden was the radical, terrifying willingness to absorb the world's suffering into their own physical bodies without ever passing it on. They were willingly digesting the harshness of the earth, processing the violence of the elements, so that their minds could remain a perfectly still sanctuary. This abstract philosophy became devastatingly real when the ice finally claimed its toll. The breaking point did not happen to one of the 19 men, but to the fragile, beating heart that had faithfully joined their ranks. Slipping on a treacherous hidden patch of sharp black ice, the dog stumbled, letting out a sudden agonizing yelp. Her paw was deeply torn, bleeding brightly onto the pristine, mocking snow. Instantly, the entire 19-man organism halted. The relentless mechanical rhythm broke. They did not leave her behind in the name of a holy, unstoppable mission. They did not view her sudden pain as an inconvenient delay to their grueling schedule. Instead, the collective knelt as one into the freezing, wet slush. Calloused hands, turning blue from the extreme drop in temperature, gently lifted the shivering animal. They carefully wrapped her wounded paw in a torn strip of their own thin, freezing saffron cloth. The crowd of onlookers, huddled tightly in their expensive winter gear, fell into a stunned, breathless silence. To see these freezing, starving men pause their monumental journey simply to cradle a broken stray dog shattered something profound within the spectators. Hot tears flowed freely down the faces of hardened cynics and restless consumers alike. They were witnessing a profound, living manifestation of healing. It was a visceral healing that proved you cannot mend a broken world by shouting your opinions at it, nor by buying more things to nervously fill the void. True repair only happens when you are willing to sit absolutely still in the freezing emptiness, bearing the pain of another living creature as if it were your very own. Aloka the peace dog was no longer just a rescued stray. She was the living, breathing pulse of their collective compassion. When February of 2026 finally arrived, the 19 men, moving as one weathered, unbreakable entity, stepped onto the crowded, frantic streets of Washington, D.C. They had walked 2,300 brutal miles. Their deeply calloused, bare feet had intimately known the blistering, melting heat of Texas highways, the treacherous, jagged gravel of rural back roads, and the blinding, freezing ice of the Carolinas. They carried no heavy luggage. They brought no printed demands to the marble steps of power. They possessed no microphones, no broadcast crews, and no digital megaphones. They simply arrived, standing tall as a silent, unignorable monument to the sheer, radical power of absolute subtraction. In the beating heart of the nation's capital, a city built entirely on loud, competing arguments, endless political negotiations, and the constant, frantic consumption of both power and information, their absolute silence was practically deafening. To the suited politicians rushing hurriedly past them on their phones, to the anxious journalists desperately hunting for the next viral, inflammatory soundbite, the monks offered only the deeply unsettling stillness of their empty alms bowls. The contrast was a violent collision of two opposing universes. The city was gorging itself on words. The monks were fasting on the profound quiet of the horizon. What did those grueling 2,300 miles actually prove to a society addicted to the binge? They proved that true, lasting peace is not a passive, sleepy state of temporary relaxation that you can casually purchase on a weekend. It is not a luxury wellness retreat, an expensive dietary supplement, or a softly lit, downloaded meditation app. Peace is a fiercely active, relentless, and often painful daily choice. It is the agonizing, deeply beautiful decision to stop consuming the endless, toxic noise of the world. For decades, we have been aggressively conditioned by glowing screens to believe that whenever we feel a sudden, aching void inside us, we must immediately stuff it with something. We fill our minds with a new, impulsive purchase, a trending, highly manufactured outrage, a relentless barrage of digital opinions, or a heavy, comforting meal. We eat the world alive to avoid facing ourselves, But the collective, a silent journey of these 19 men ruthlessly exposed the fatal flaw in our modern, overstuffed diet. You absolutely cannot fill a profound spiritual void with cheap material things. You cannot endlessly consume your way out of deep, existential anxiety. The brutal, purifying diet of the horizon taught us that you must do the exact opposite. You must learn, slowly, deliberately, and painfully, to sit completely comfortable within your own terrifying emptiness. You must ruthlessly starve the panicked, demanding ego so that the quiet, neglected soul can finally have the space to breathe. As you sit there right now, staring passively into the glowing, rectangular abyss of your screen, the digital world is already meticulously preparing your very next meal of panic, comparison, and distraction. The hidden algorithm is endlessly, so violently hungry, and it desperately wants you to be hungry too. It wants your attention, your anger, and your fear. But for just a singular, rebellious moment, consider the immense quiet power of simply refusing the next bite. Consider the profound act of putting the screen down. Consider those 19 silent figures, standing barefoot and shivering in the bitter winter chill, operating as a single organism of pure restraint. They proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the fragile human spirit does not need to be constantly overfed, stimulated, or entertained to survive. It only needs to be witnessed in its rawest form. The next time you feel that familiar, desperate, scratching urge to scroll, to argue with a stranger, to consume just one more piece of entirely meaningless content to numb your restless mind, remember the slow, deliberate, unified footsteps of the walk for peace. Remember that true, lasting healing does not magically begin when you finally acquire everything you ever thought you wanted. It does not wait for you at the bottom of an infinite digital feed or at the end of a financial transaction. It begins in the terrifying, intensely beautiful moment when you voluntarily decide that you need absolutely nothing else. It begins when you embrace the quiet. Stop consuming. Close the application. Turn off the bright, demanding screen. Sit alone in the heavy, unbroken silence. And for the first time in your life, let the profound, beautiful emptiness finally fill you up.